Hello, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon session at Dexterity. I'm super excited to be here with all of you today. I'm going to talk about Mind the Gap. Now, I'm not referring to the gap between the train and the platform on the London Underground, but rather the gap between genders in tech. And just hold on right there. Don't leave. I know this subject can be a little sensitive, sometimes even intimidating. Maybe you've heard too much about it, but let me give you a little bit of my background, just so you understand where I'm coming from. Half a lifetime ago, I took a plane over from Stockholm to San Francisco and discovered Silicon Valley. I didn't even know that the valley existed, and I didn't know anything about technology. But I knocked on doors and I found my first job in tech selling hardware. After that, I went on to starting 2 enterprise software companies. The first one was a pretty quick flip, and the second one, we ran for 15 years, my co-founder and I together, before we were able to get acquired by Citrix in 2015. After working there for a year, I was thinking, what can I do next? As I was new again to the Bay Area, because I'd been away for a while on the East Coast, I started networking. I went to tons of women's events, amazing gatherings, lots of women supporting each other and talking about how they could advance to the next step in their careers. I had, like I said, worked in tech, which meant that I was very used to having guys around. And I thought it was very strange that there were no men present at these events. So I talked to a few of the men that I know, and I said, if I organize something called Women in Tech, an event for guys, would you be interested? And they all said, yes, absolutely, bring it on. So said and done, I started EQ Inspiration as a series of events where I would have some intelligent speaker come in and talk about some emotional intelligence topic. And then the highlight of the show would be me interviewing men on stage about their backgrounds, their current jobs, what they felt about equality, and what they were doing to support these women that they were working with. And amazing stories came to light. I started to think, how can I get more of these stories? How can I share them with a broader audience? And what would motivate guys to actually listen to this? I noticed that the personal motivation is absolutely the most necessary. I could drown you all in statistics, but I'm not going to do that. What is really interesting is understanding where your motivation comes from. Do you have a daughter who's really into math and you're thinking, oh my, she's going to go into engineering. Is this the workplace I want her to enter? Or maybe you have a woman on your team who's thinking about leaving and you're not really even sure how to address the whole thing. But there's something in your work life or personal life that makes you think about that maybe we need to create a different kind of work environment. So what I did was dozens and dozens of interviews with men just like you, from CEOs to individual contributors, people in sales, engineering, operations, finance, VCs. And all of this material, I took it and I generously divided the characters into 7 prototypes. And I gave these character prototypes names and put them into what I call a matrix. Depending on where their awareness around equality was, depending on what their willingness and what their actions they were actually taking to support women. So at the top of the matrix, we have the advocates, Mark, James, and Samir. And they understand the value of diversity of thought. They care about the people and they care about the business. They drive change. They speak up on behalf of women and minorities. And they never worry about what other people think that they are. They never worry about what other people think about their support for women and minorities. They're intelligent and aware of their influence, and they understand why their personal contribution really matters. So maybe you're one of the advocates. You might identify as one or a combination of these. The next 3 are the allies, Memo, Al and Cree. Now, they have, to them, it's more like the personal matter that's important. Maybe they have a daughter who's changing their view of women in the workplace, or maybe they have worked on a team which was absolutely fantastic with one or multiple women, and they want to build more teams like that. So it's really personal. They prefer to speak up and step up on behalf of women and minorities in a one-on-one setting, not in front of a crowd. If Mark is the person that you identify with, he's the expert, he's the specialist. He understands this whole topic of diversity and inclusion. Maybe he works in HR, or maybe he works as an outside consultant who comes in and works with the CEO. If you are a James, maybe you're the leader of your team or your organization, and you will drive change and look at values of your organization. And you will probably have a team that's already fairly diverse. Maybe it's not 50-50 men and women, but pretty close to it. People look up to you, and you're sort of a quiet leader. Samir is the next person on the matrix, and he's the sponsor. If you identify with Samir, you will go out of your way to support a woman's promotion, to make her visible. You'll put your own name on the line. You're super empathetic. And that might be because you're either part of a minority yourself, or you've been an outsider at some point in your life, so you can relate. If you are part of the allies and you're Memo, so Memo is right below Samir, you're a mentor. So you will take on mentorship, either kind of just as it happens, or maybe it's through a formal mentoring program. And maybe you've mentored men before and you're now mentoring women as well. The problem here is that you may still feel a little bit uncomfortable if it's not a formal mentorship program. You might think that people would frown upon you or criticize your question or your motives for being a mentor to somebody if it's not through that formal program. So one thing I want to say there is, if you feel like you're on the verge of mentoring somebody who's not part of your normal club of people, then you should definitely go and ask for a formal mentorship program. Find one outside your organization, or go to HR and ask for it. The next person is Al. He's our happy-go-lucky ally. He loves to work with women, finds them super valuable, always very comfortable, but doesn't really understand that there's actually something he can do to further advance them or further help them. Cree, who is number 6 on the scale of 7, he is very, very friendly and very helpful, typically to women that he knows very well. So maybe it's his sister or daughter, or maybe a woman he's worked with for a very long time. But beyond that, if somebody starts talking about these topics that we're talking about today, he will maybe have that initial reaction that some of you had: I don't want to listen to this. I better just walk back to my office. And that's okay. The last person on the matrix is Richard, who goes by his nickname. I don't want to neglect this guy. He's very important for reference purposes. But the fact is, he's opposed to change. He fears that women are going to take over men's positions in the workplace. And it will just take a little bit of work for him to find his motivator. What will you do once you've identified with one of these characters? I mean, in my book that's coming out, Women in Tech, a book for guys, there's a more in-depth discussion and description what each of these characters look like. And you might say, oh, I'm probably Al, or I'm a combination of Al and Memo, or I'm a James, I'm almost at the top. So there isn't anything that I can do to improve, even though Jameses tend to have a fairly humble approach. But the idea with the book is not for me to tell you what you should be doing. I don't like it when people tell me what to do, so I kind of assume that other people are the same way. But you can read about what other men who are a character level above yours are already doing. So this book has very short stories, quick examples, couple of tips for each one of you. I don't think it's fair that we throw all men into one bucket and say, this is how we're going to solve this problem. What I want to do is be respectful that everybody starts at whatever level they're at, and that's perfectly fine. And should any of you aspire to do just a little bit more, then you can read what the character above yours is doing. So what I'm going to do right now is, rather than just giving you more data points, I'm going to, for each step, from Richard to Cree, from Cree to Al, from Al to Memo, and so on, I'm just going to share a little short story for each one of those so that you understand that if these people can do it, so can you. From Richard to Cree is the first one. So we know that this guy is a little stubborn and it can be a little tricky to get him out of his own ways. I have a great example of a Richard. He worked on a sales team and he was uncomfortable sort of supporting the woman who went on maternity leave by himself. She left. And what happened was the CEO in the company said, we're going to take all of this woman's accounts and we're going to divvy them up between the junior salespeople. And then she's not going to see any commission or anything like that. And this guy said, well, that doesn't sound very good. What they did was they got together as a whole team. So all the people that were still there that used to work with this woman, they said, well, how can we support her together? And by the time she came back, they'd come up with a plan and they took all the accounts back and divvied them up the way that they should have been from the beginning so that she got the commission that she would have gotten even if she hadn't been out for a couple of months with a baby. And so there you have it. Richard now becomes a Cree. From Cree to Al, what is it that this guy that we know who will kind of pull back and withdraw if he feels uncomfortable? What is it that he can do to kind of graduate to the next level and become an Al? Well, one very tangible thing, and I'm sure you've heard this one before. So one of the men in the book who I interviewed, he said, well, it's very easy. You can kind of moderate the meeting. So if you go into a meeting and you have, and this is not just for men and women, this is just typical for all settings where you have one person who confiscates the meeting and talks 90% of the time, kind of like I'm doing right now, but you actually want to hear from others. So you say, so I think Julia has something to say about this, or Julia brought up a very interesting point last week. Why don't we discuss that? Referring back to other people who don't say very much. And then also saying, that's great. Thank you so much for your time, Bob. Now let's go over to some of the other people and hear their opinions. So it's kind of making it part of just your natural management style without having to say, I'm a big diversity, spokesperson. That's not the point. The other thing is, which is an important one, if somebody says, are you an ally and you're not quite sure what to say, then you can say, yes, I listened to Ava's presentation. That's a good sign. It's a good start. The next one is from Al to Memo. Now, the most important thing here is to build trust. And if you are, and when you are a mentor, create a safe space for your mentees. So another story from the book is this gentleman who brings a woman into, or he goes into her office and they start talking, and he's been mentoring her a little bit before. And she says, well, I'm kind of insecure in certain settings and talking to my manager about certain things. And this mentor says, well, let's practice, let's get together and let's practice. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to have you lose your job over this, but you need to practice being more argumentative, or being comfortable saying no, or being comfortable speaking up. So creating that safe space for your mentees is really helpful. the easy tip here is to say, how can I help you? That one always works, always. From memo to Samir. So now we're getting into the more advanced advocates, right? The ones that we know the focus is not on them, the focus is really on the person that they're supporting. So taking women's challenges seriously, that might sound very, very serious, and it can be. But here we have one of the stories, again, that I share in the book is about the man who sits in his office. The woman comes in, she's worked for him for a long time. She doesn't really know how to proceed with this conversation, but they talk for a while, and it comes out that she doesn't know if she can keep her job as she's starting a family. That's a big topic to discuss. And this man shows incredible empathy and offers her multiple different, not solutions, but suggestions and ideas of what she could do. Eventually, she decides to take a complete leave of absence. And the sunshine part of the story is that eventually he's able to hire her back. But just tuning into what a woman is saying, not always saying, okay, let me come up with a solution. Maybe some suggestions might be a good idea, but don't try to solve her problems for her. From Samir to James. So we're getting closer to the top of the matrix at this point. Here we're not just affecting one woman at a time, as Samir typically does as a sponsor, but more a whole group of women or a whole organization, the whole culture of the company. So I have one of my own in the book who actually went through a really difficult time in the company. There was a woman who was, it was a situation between a man and a woman, really, that became pretty critical. And eventually they both left the company, and he thought, oh, is this the culture that we have? So he hired outside help. He hired an expert who came in and kind of determined that this was an isolated event, but they also did a full-blown value exercise. What was the value of the business, and how was it that they wanted everybody to feel when they came into the office? And distilled down the value concepts down to what they're still using years afterwards. So it's, James will not, like I said, just focus on one or two women, but rather the whole culture and the feeling of the company. And lastly, so you're a James, you're already doing all of these things, and your team is 50-50 men and women. And you ask me, well, what should I do now? Make sure your story becomes visible. Make sure people get to hear what you've done. Talk about your results. Talk about that diversity made your team more innovative, more free thinking, more creative, and that your business results have actually gone up. That is your job when you're an aspiring mark. That is a super quick run through of the characters, what some of them are doing. And I have two asks of you before you leave here today, before your day is over. I would like each and every one of you, regardless if you're a man or a woman listening to this, I would like you to identify a woman or a person from a minority group who you've seen around or maybe worked with a little bit, and reach out to that person and say, hey, I just listened to this presentation about allyship. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, but I just want to let you know that I'm here if there's anything I can do for you. My second ask is that you go ahead and pre-order my book. Just coming from the software industry, I can tell you that getting a book out is just as difficult as getting a piece of software out. So please be patient with me. I'm hoping within the next 3 to 4 months. And in the meantime, just take this address down and go ahead and pre-order the book today. That's it. Thank you very, very much. I think that if we work together, men and women, the women who are listening to this presentation, thank you so much for joining. Please go out and find an Al or a Cree who you can help to help some more women along the way, so mentor them. And it's been a real pleasure to participate in Dexterity, and now I'm looking forward to the Q&A. Thank you so much.